Hey YouTube, this is AC Tech Reviews, and this is my review of the Blackberry Priv. So let me just give you a quick tour. You have your volume rocker at the side, a micro SD expansion slot, which is great. Here's your SIM card tray, and awkwardly enough, your power button's on the opposite side. Here is your speaker bar, which is actually coming out of one side only, and there is your pull-out all touch back illuminated Blackberry keyboard. And on the back you have an 18 megapixel camera with dual flash LED, a very nice textured back similar to a Blackberry Q10, which it's sticky, but definitely not as sticky as a Nexus 5X. At the bottom, you have your standard micro USB for power and your 3.5mm jack. So just a quick note, I will have links down below of my review of the Nexus 5X and also the Blackberry Passport, because I used them as a benchmark for a comparison for this phone. So be sure to check those out. So first off is build quality. There's definitely some sort of creakiness that goes on, particularly on one of the edges where the power button is. If you press down, you can maybe eliminate it temporarily, but it's definitely there. People have commented that there's some kind of dead space here. My particular unit didn't have so much of an issue with that. My main issue was it's very slight, but if you're actually pressing down on the screen when you are trying to use it with the physical keyboard, there is some play there. It's very slight. I think if you are very particular about those things, it might drive you crazy. But I think because this is a sliding phone, I think there's definitely going to be issues with some play, but for the most part the build is really solid. If anything, there's definitely a heft to this phone. My main driver is a Nexus 5X, and for me, this phone, when I first grabbed it, it's a much larger screen. It's a 5.4-inch screen. Just in one hand, I noticed these corners would dig into my palm, especially when trying to navigate with one thumb. You can see that there's definitely some kind of getting used to. I'm just really familiar with a nice curved edge on the Nexus 5X and the lightness of that particular phone. This one definitely has a good heft, and especially if you pull out the physical keyboard, although it's touch sensitive, it becomes a two-handed device. And so if you are comfortable with using a two-handed device, then this might be the phone for you. But the other option is using it as a one-handed device, but being such a larger phone with a larger screen, there is some getting used to, especially with these edges. So I just want to briefly cover this heating issue that a lot of people were having with the earlier release of the phone running Lollipop. When I got this phone, it was on Lollipop, and I noticed there was some heating around the top left of the camera, but that dramatically was reduced after upgrading to Marshmallow. So if you're getting an unlocked version of the phone right now, or even a carrier branded phone, it should be running Marshmallow at this point. And battery life has increased dramatically as well, but most importantly, the heating has been diminished. But however, I would still say that for a phone running the same core CPU as a Nexus 5X, that phone doesn't heat up at all whatsoever. It is kind of odd that this one does, and I think there's a lot of background processes running on this particular phone that I'll go into more detail later. So quickly going back to build quality, my particular unit, for whatever reason, has a lot more light bleed on the right side compare it to the left side. And the enter key, I'm not sure if you'll be able to see it, the enter key and several of the other keys here are much brighter than the rest of the keyboard. In fact, if I press down the enter key, it affects the lighting on several of the other of these keys here. I don't think you'll be able to see it on the camera, but it's one of those things where it's really annoying if these kind of things bother you, especially at the price point. If you're paying retail, which is about at this point probably like $650 or $700, this is probably an issue. Other than that, everything else on this phone, besides the heft, is built really well. So there are a few things I want to mention about this phone. One is that I notice that when you install an app on this phone, it takes longer than on a Nexus device. I don't know if that's true for all third OEM Nexus devices, or it's just true for the Blackberry Priv. And I think there's something about the built-in security that apps just take longer to run or install. But once that's done with, for the most part, it works flawlessly. The other thing I noticed too is that even though this phone comes with 3 gigabytes of memory, just the average memory usage on this phone is about 2.2 gigabytes, whereas on a Nexus 5X running the same Android with only 2 gigabytes of RAM has an average usage of about 1.3 gigabytes. So in terms of actual free available RAM, the phones are about the same. So let's have a quick look at Marshmallow running on the Priv. So first off, you have your standard Android notifications, and then on top of that you have these BlackBerry-esque type notifications, which to me obviously is extremely redundant, and until you swipe away one of these notifications, then the BlackBerry notification goes away. So essentially you have redundant notifications from Android and from BlackBerry, and I'm not sure how you go about turning that off. But as you see, if I swipe them away, those BlackBerry notifications go away. So this is probably the coolest thing on the Priv, and that would be the BlackBerry hub. If you were even interested in this phone, you're probably aware of the hub that they've basically brought over from BB10, and I have it running with all my emails and Twitter notifications, and you are able to aggregate Facebook, WhatsApp, Instagram, and I think Pinterest. I mean, they're continuing to add more and more, and if you really value that kind of consolidation of all your notifications, the hub definitely has a huge benefit for that. Some of the cool features from BB10 that they try to bring over is you can kind of peek if you keep sliding down your calendar notifications. I don't have any right now, but you can see if I pull it down, it will list all your notifications from your calendar, and if you can tap in there, it'll open up your calendar app. So another neat thing about the Priv is that it comes in with this built-in detect security thing. What it does is it keeps tracks of some of the apps that you have in here, and what they're contacting after being installed. So my weather app is continually looking for my location, which is fine, but once you tap into that, you can go into permissions, and you can decide to either remove that permission or allow that permission. And this, I think, is something novel for phones that aren't running Marshmallow, because I believe in Marshmallow that native ability has already been integrated into this particular version of Android. But the advantage of Detect is that it actually will notify you when an app is actually requesting that permission. So me personally, when I install an app, I go through permissions and I just basically deny permissions that I feel like aren't appropriate for that particular app. For a non-Nexus device, it's pretty amazing that this phone gets security updates faster than a Nexus device, and it's one of the few Android OEM phones that actually has Marshmallow running. However, will it get Android N? So one of the cool things of having a physical keyboard is you can get keyed shortcuts, and so for T, I have it pull up my Twitter account, and this keyboard is touch sensitive, and so you can use it to scroll, and you can use some of the hotkeys that, if you're a Blackberry user, to T for top, B for bottom. However, I've noticed that this always doesn't work for every app, particularly an Android app. Even on the home screen, you can use your keyboard to scroll through screens, and they've actually added the ability to do a flow or swipe typing on a physical keyboard. The other thing that is useful in this phone is they've tried to bring over universal search from BB10. So if I start typing, it will propagate hot keyword searches through your apps or your messages. I would say that it doesn't work as well as BB10, but it's probably one of the only universal searches available on an Android device as far as I know, at least natively integrated into the phone. So I think this is where I struggled the most in terms of using this phone. When I'd be doing a task, I would be confused as to whether I should use the keyboard or just use the on-screen keys. And as a longtime Blackberry user, I would rate this keyboard as not the greatest. I would even say that maybe it's better than a 9700. I wouldn't say it's better than I guess it's wider than a 9900. Probably my all-time favorite keyboard would be either a Classic or the Passport. Obviously the Passport not having the fourth row, but I just feel like the feedback on this keyboard is a little bit lacking, and it does feel a little cramped, and I don't have extremely large hands. And so I kind of forced myself to use the keyboard more to kind of see if I would start to enjoy it, and I never really got that kind of sense. And so just for one-handed use, especially on an Android device, I would kind of default to the on-screen keyboard, which I did not like. And so what I ended up doing was install SwiftKey, which is the keyboard I have on my Nexus. But I found that if you install a third-party virtual keyboard on this phone, for whatever reason, you lose functionality of some of the hotkey features on this keyboard, on the physical keyboard. And so then I thought, well, if I'm going to lose functionality on the physical keyboard, then it kind of defeats the purpose of having a physical keyboard on this phone. So I defaulted back to the original Blackberry on-screen keyboard and just had terrible typing errors. So I just want to give you an example of this on-screen keyboard where it predicts what you're trying to type or what word you're trying to spell, and for whatever reason I can't stare at the keys and try to flick up these words that are showing up on my keyboard. It's actually distracting for me, and so what I would do is I would end up just ignoring the predictions and trying to hit the keys exactly, because it doesn't really do any other form of prediction besides this floating words. And so I was just having a tough time with this keyboard, and I think it was really frustrating because I wanted to be able to use both, and just try to use the physical keyboard, which, in my mind was easier to use than the on-screen keyboard. However, I've noticed this too, where the enter key didn't necessarily, actually it would never actually send a message, maybe text messages, but for tweets or hangout messages or whatever other Android apps that require a send key, the enter key would just give you a new paragraph. And so you'd actually have to go up here and hit the key on the on-screen button to send a message. Which, again, it would have been nice to be able to just do that through the physical keyboard. Alright, so let's talk about this camera. Even though it's an 18 megapixel camera, I will tell you first off that it takes worse pictures than the 12 megapixel sensor on the Nexus 5X. And I never really understood this before, but I think once you get used to using a phone with a really good camera, I find it hard. It's hard to go back to a phone that is lacking in the camera department. I want to say that the Passport camera took better pictures. I mean, when there's good sunlight and you're out in the open, still photos, great, they're fine. But any kind of normal day-to-day life stuff indoors, sort of sketchy lighting and some movement, you know, the pictures were terrible. Even with, and for some reason, the HDR was always left on default, and I don't know, there's a lot of just processing noise and software noise that I didn't really find with the Passport camera. The Passport camera was quick and the colors are great, and on this phone, I know some people have said that this is probably the best Blackberry camera. I tend to disagree. I think the Passport had better photos than this on the Priv, but however, I think the Nexus 5X camera is excellent for the price point. And considering that the Nexus 5X is cheaper than the Passport, and also this Priv if you pay retail. So that's something to consider if you are if you're reliant on a good camera phone. Yeah, so here are some of my final thoughts. If you like a phone with a physical keyboard and like to use two hands, then this might be the phone for you. If you prefer to be on the go and just quickly respond to messages with one hand, or you have a much larger Android phone to begin with and you have large hands, then this kind of phone could be for you too. But I would say if you want a physical keyboard on the phone, you definitely want to be using two hands. The Blackberry Hub on the Priv is probably the most unique feature of this phone. If you want all your notifications to be all in one location, this is the phone for you. So I really liked using this phone primarily because of the hub, the fact that it had wireless charging, and the battery life on this phone is pretty amazing. Easily 1.5 days, even maybe 2 days with lighter use. However, because the camera in my mind was lacking, and a little bit of confusion with using a physical keyboard versus a virtual keyboard, and kind of a lackluster experience in the physical keyboard, kind of made me decide that I wanted to just go back to my Nexus 5X. I prefer the lighter package and less of a heft. So that's it for this review. If you liked it, subscribe. If you have any questions, you can contact me at actechreviews on Twitter or at actechreviews@gmail.com. And I will see you guys in the next one. Thanks for watching.